Whenever we read a Torah portion that was preceded by another Torah portion, as is the case in all the time, even though they're separate entities, each one has its own internal logic and function, but there must be a connection between the end of one parsha and the beginning of the next. And Rashi frequently tries to establish that there is a connection. This parsha that we're reading this week, Baha'u'llah, is the parsha that follows Naso. And Naso ends on the theme of the Nesi'im, the leaders of the 12 tribes, brought special offerings to the temple, to the sanctuary in the desert known as the Mishkan. Starting on the first day of Nisan, the second year the Jews were in the desert, the leader of the tribe of Yehuda, Nachshon ben Aminadav, brought his special offering, an elaborate offering. And on the second day, the leader of the tribe of Yisachar brought his offering. And likewise, every day, the 12 days of Nisan, all of the leaders, known as the Nesi'im, Nasi is singular, Nesi'im is plural, brought their special offerings. That's how last week's parsha concludes. This week's parsha picks up with God telling Moshe to speak to Aaron that he should light the menorah, and the Torah says that that's exactly what he did. What is the connection between the Nesi'im, the leaders bringing their dedicatory offerings, and Aaron being told to light the menorah? So Rashi comments on this, and he says that when Aaron saw how the leaders of all the 12 tribes brought special offering to dedicate the Mishkan, Chol Shadaita, he felt bad. He was despondent. He was not happy about it. Why? Because he says, I'm not part of this. Neither am I part of it myself. Neither is my tribe. You see, the 12 tribes can be, we get the number 12, but there are actually 13 tribes because Joseph is divided into two. So when we count Joseph as two, Levi is excluded. And Aaron was the leader of the tribe of Levi, which happens to be the most important tribe. The Levi gives us the Kohanim, the priests, and the Levites. And yet he was denied the opportunity to be part of the dedication of the Mishkan. So he felt bad. One explanation why he felt bad is because Aaron knew that his involvement in the golden calf would have repercussions. And he was always filled with a sense that God is not going to accept my tshuva, my repentance. And that's why when the fire didn't come down on the first day of Nisan, Aaron felt that it's because of him. So even though the fire did come down, he felt God still has some bad feelings towards him because of his participation in the egel and the golden calf. Whatever the reason is, he felt deprived, he felt denied. And what did he do? He didn't do anything. He just felt bad. So God says to Moshe, tell your brother Aaron that he shouldn't feel bad, that what he is going to do is much greater than what all the Nesi'im, all the leaders of the tribes did. The question is, in what way is what Aaron is going to do? He's going to light the menorah. But why is the menorah greater and superior to bringing these offerings? The offerings are part of the service in the temple, and the menorah is part of the service. So why is the menorah considered to be superior to the sacrifices? So the Ramban, Nachmanides, explains that this is a reference to the light of Hanukkah, that the menorah that we lit in the Beis HaMikdash was the article with which the great miracle occurred during Hanukkah, that the oil that was sufficient to last one night lasted for 8 nights. And as a result, we light the Hanukkah menorah every year. That's like a continuation of the lighting of the menorah in the temple. In some ways, it's even superior. The menorah in the temple had 7 branches. Hanukkah, we have 8. And then a Medrash tells us that in the days of Moshiach, Hanukkah will still shine brightly, while other holidays, Passover, Shavuos, Sukkot, Rosh Hashanah, will pale in comparison to the new Messianic holidays. Hanukkah will still retain its glory and its light. And one of the reasons for that is that Hanukkah represents the original primordial light that was created on day one of creation, which was able to give a person the ability to see from one end of the world to the other. It was a spiritual light that gave you different kind of insight. That's the light that will be revealed in the days of Moshiach. And every Hanukkah we get part of that light. So Hanukkah is synonymous with the light of Moshiach. So what Aaron had was greater than what the Nesi'im had. They had sacrifices. With the destruction of the temple, they ceased. True, we replace the sacrifices with prayer. We replace it with the learning of the laws of the sacrifices, but still the original sacrifices we don't have. But Hanukkah continues. I just wanted to add a little bit of an insight. There's a famous question asked about Hanukkah, why we celebrate it for 8 days. After all, the miracle was only a 7-day miracle. They had enough oil to last for 1 day. The miracle was that from 1, it stretched out to 8. So there was only a 7-day miracle. There are literally hundreds of answers to that question. One possible answer is that when we light the Hanukkah candles, there are actually 2 things that we're doing. Number 1, we're remembering the miracle. That's 7 days. But number 2, we are extending the light of the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash. When we light the Hanukkah candles, it's like we're bringing the lighting of the menorah in the Beis Hamikdash into our own homes. That's what the first night is about. The first night is that the light of the menorah of the Beis Hamikdash is kindled in our homes. And the other 7 nights are for the commemoration of the miracle that lasted for 7 days. Be that as it may, Aaron was pacified that what he was going to do would be greater. But one thing we see, and it's a pattern in this week's Torah portion, is the idea of a Jew complaining. We often think of complaining as a negative, and it could be negative, and there are negative complaints in this parsha, but the general idea of complaining about certain things can be considered positive. For example, later on in this parsha, we read about Pesach Sheni, the second Passover. What is the second Passover? There were a group of Jews at the first anniversary of Passover. That was like the second Passover ever to be observed. The people were told that if you're tameh, if you're ritually unclean, you can't partake in the Paschal offering. There were a group of people who were ritually unclean, and they were told, you can't bring a carbon Pesach, a Paschal offering. They felt bad about it. They complained, Lama Nigara, why should we be denied? Why should we be deprived? And Moses brought their complaint to God, and God says they're right, and they're going to be given a second opportunity. A month later, this Pesach Sheni, the second Passover. So we see that their complaining was not only not an undesirable thing, you're kvetching, you're complaining, but it was something that was like music to God's ears. When a Jew complains about their inability to do a mitzvah, God says, that's what I love, that's what I want, and I'll give you another opportunity. I will grant you your wish. And the same thing with Aaron. Aaron didn't complain verbally. He just expressed it in his heart that he felt bad that he couldn't be part of the dedication of the Mishkan. And God says, not only are you going to be a part of it, you'll have a superior part of it. There's another area where complaining, the idea of God wants us to complain, is considered a positive thing, and that is based on a talk of the Rebbe, where the question is asked by Rashi. The events of the first celebration of Passover in the desert happened to be the only celebration of Passover. For 38 years following the first Passover, there was no Paschal offering until they entered the land of Israel. And that, Rashi says, was considered to be a negative. And that's why it's not highlighted in the Torah. You see, the Torah, the book of Numbers, Bamidbar, begins discussing events that happened the second year they were in the desert, the second month. The events of Pesach Sheni happened the second year, the first month. Yet they are only here in chapter 9, while the later event is chapter 1. So Rashi says, because the Torah didn't want to highlight the negative fact that the Jews did not bring a Paschal offering for 38 years. And the Rebbe asked the question, why should that be? And the commentaries asked the question, why should that be held against them? After all, God didn't give them the mitzvah to celebrate Passover for all those years. It was a one-time thing, the first anniversary, and the next time would be when they enter the land of Israel. So why is that considered negative? So one of the commentators answers, the Tosfos commentary, answers that the reason why they couldn't bring the offering is they were told that they're not going to have the obligation until they enter the land of Israel. Well, the reason they couldn't enter the land of Israel was because of the sin of the spies. So indirectly, the reason they couldn't bring the offering is not because they didn't want to bring the offering. Maybe they wanted to bring it, but God says you can't because you're not in Israel. But the reason they were not in Israel was because of their sin. That's why it's considered to be a negative characterization of the people. Another answer is that the reason why they couldn't bring the Paschal offering is because in the desert, because of health concerns, they didn't circumcise their children. And the Torah says if you don't have everyone in your household circumcised, you can't bring the Paschal offering. But it wasn't their fault, but it was their fault because the fact that they couldn't bring the Paschal offering in the desert because of the health matter was a sign that God did not give them the ability because of their imperfections, because of their sins. So again, it's indirectly. So the Rebbe says it's not indirect. Why couldn't they bring the Paschal offering? Because they were told that they can't. 38 years, you will not bring a Paschal offering. Where were the complaints? Where did the people show that they were deprived of something so special? Why didn't the people say, why can't we bring a Korban Pesach? Maybe God would have said, yes, you could, and maybe he would have given them something else to compensate, but they didn't complain. That's why it's considered a negative, and that's why the Torah doesn't put it at the beginning of the book, so it shouldn't be highlighted. This is the powerful message that God does not mind when we complain, as long as we're complaining about the right things. When the Jews complained about meat, that was considered to be a negative. But when the Jews complained about having another opportunity to become closer to God, because that's what the word korban, sacrifice, really means, getting close to God, God is happy to hear that complaint and will grant us our wishes in one way or another. And this, of course, tells us that God wants us to ask and demand the coming of Moshiach. People who say, well, God will bring Moshiach whenever he feels like it. Yes, that's true. God controls everything. But God wants us to ask for it. And we're asking for it not just for ourselves, for our own pleasure, for our own freedom. We're asking of it because that's when we will be able to serve God in the most complete and most perfect way. That's when God himself, the Shekhinah, the divine presence, will be taken out of exile and suffers along with us. So our complaint, why we're still in exile, is something that God finds commendable, and we should continue and persist with that complaint. Now, the Torah says that Aaron was told to kindle the menorah, but it doesn't say the word kindle. It says bahaloscha. And if you translate the word bahaloscha literally, which is not the way it's mostly translated, the word bahaloscha has the word ola in it, going up, that you should cause the flames to go up. Not just to kindle, but cause the flames to go up. What does that mean? So Rashi tells us that what it means is that when you light the menorah, you should make sure that the flames will go up on their own. You don't have to always tweak it, pull the wick out, add some oil, adjust something, because that's not the way you light the menorah. When you light the menorah would last from before evening till morning. You would make sure that the flame would burn fully without any need to intervene with its kindling. Once you light it, it's lit, and it remains that way. That's the reason why the Torah uses that word bahaloscha as opposed to the more common word for lighting something, bahadlikcha, which means when you kindle, when you light it. This is a very powerful message the Rebbe would always teach us. We have an obligation to bring light to other Jews. How do we bring light? By sharing with them teachings of Torah. Torah is called light. By sharing with them the opportunity to do a mitzvah. A mitzvah is called a lamp, a light. By giving them the light, we are fulfilling the mitzvah of lighting the menorah. We can't light the menorah literally because we don't have the Beis HaMikdash until imminently we will have the third Beis HaMikdash. But meanwhile, We can illuminate others by teaching them Torah, by enabling them to do a mitzvah, assisting them with the ability to do a mitzvah. But when you illuminate someone, when you bring light to them, you have to not just do it in a way where every day you have to come back to them to teach them how to do the same mitzvah. Every day you have to learn with them the same thing because they can't learn on their own. Sure, you can come back every day, but the person should be able to shine on his own. Make sure that this flame doesn't need tweaking, that this person becomes independently qualified and capable of bringing light and bringing light to others as well. That's the primary message. Now, there's a Jewish custom to read Ethics of the Fathers from Passover to Shavuot, 6 chapters corresponding to the 6 weeks. There's another custom that continues doing this after Shavuos until Rosh Hashanah. So this week we're going to be studying the first chapter of Ethics of the Fathers, coinciding with the Torah reading of Baha'u'llah, and I think we can find a very close connection. In the very first Mishna, the very first paragraph of Ethics of the Fathers, the sages tell us 3 teachings. These are the men of the Great Assembly who lived at the time of the Second Temple, at the beginning of the Second Temple era. And they say there are 3 teachings that they shared. One was be deliberate in judgment. The second was raise many students. And the third one is create a fence around the Torah. Now, simply, on a simple level, who is this directed to? It's directed to the rabbis who were judges. And a judge has a tendency often to render quick decisions because I already had this case, similar case, identical case, and I know what the verdict should be. No, be deliberate in judgment. There are nuances, there are differences in every case, and they make a difference in the end result as well. So be deliberate in judgment. What about raising many students? In those days, where did you learn Torah? You learned Torah from the sages. What were the sages doing most of the time? They were sitting in the academy, which was a court. And they would have students sitting around them who later on became judges themselves. So you might think that you want to have the elite, the best students, to succeed you. And you might close the doors to other students. So no, raise many students. The Talmud tells the story of one of the great sages who had a guard at the door and didn't let everyone in. You had to be totally sincere. Your inside had to be like your outside. And that deprived many people from learning Torah. So here's the message was, raise as many students as you can have. And the third message is, you're a rabbi, you're a judge. You might want to relax some of the standards because you see the people are a little bit lax, so you want to relax the standards. So they said, no, on the contrary, when there's a danger of people losing respect for the law, create a fence around the law, make additional restrictions, rabbinic laws. That's the basis of rabbinic legislation to protect the biblical laws. That's the simple understanding of the Mishna. And I once heard from the Rebbe a different way of looking at it, that it applies not just to rabbis and judges, it applies to every teacher. And by extension to every one of us, because every Jew is required to be a teacher. If you know Aleph, that's all you know. You have to share it with someone who doesn't know Aleph. If you know Aleph and Beis, share it with someone who knows only Aleph, and so on. So this is directed to every Jew as a teacher. The first lesson is, when a student comes into the classroom, or when someone comes into our life that we feel a responsibility to teach, to mentor, the first thing that we do naturally is to size the person up, to decide what kind of a person is this. Is this a smart person? Is this a dull person? Is this someone who's willing to learn? Is this someone who is really bored? Should I really spend a lot of time with this person? Should I focus on this? Should I focus on that? And we tend to be hasty in our decision as to what kind of person we're going to bring into our classroom. No, don't do that. Be deliberate in judgment. You have to assess every student based on one's true talents and qualities and abilities. Well, that raises a question. If I have to be so careful with every student, I can't just dismiss the student and say, I already know everything about this student and I can just summarily decide how I'm going to teach the student. I can't have too many students because I'm so busy evaluating every student. I can't really have many students. Let me restrict it to a few students and I'll give them all the attention they need. So the Mishnah says, no, you should raise many students. In spite of the fact that you have to be so individualistic, you have to focus on every individual's qualities and abilities, you should have many students. But then the question is, how could I do both? How could I balance both? I'm so careful. I'm giving every student what they need individually by assessing their true abilities, by not just perfunctorily and superficially slotting them into certain categories. In order to do that, I can't have many students. And the answer is no, you could have many students. It doesn't say teach many students. It says raise them, stand them up, give them the foundations, give them the skills so they could learn on their own. And that's the same message that we had with Aaron, that he not just kindled the menorah, he raised the flames, that the flames could be on their own. They don't have to constantly be tweaked and reinforced. And the same thing over here. Yes, if you have to deal with every student and keep on spoon feeding them every day the same thing, you'll never be able to do it. But here is the challenge, to raise up the students to the level where they can be on their own. And then someone would say, if I have to have so many students who are on so many different levels, some of them are on a very low level, you know what I should do? I should compromise. I should cut corners, not be as demanding and as strict, and show them they don't have to do everything. Just lower the standards, which is what happens in education today. That instead of raising the standards and lifting people up so they can meet the standards, we're reducing and lowering the standards. And the Mishnah therefore says, no, create a fence around the Torah, raise the standards. But then the question is, if I raise the standards, how is this weaker student going to come up to that level? And here's where Ethics of the Fathers comes into the picture again. In the same first chapter, there's a very famous Mishnah quoting Hillel, who said, you should be of the students of Aaron, who loves peace, pursues peace, loves everyone, and brings them close to the Torah. And the Rebbe would always focus on the last phrase, bring them close to the Torah. It doesn't say bring the Torah close to them, but bring them close to the Torah. Bringing Torah close to them would suggest that you have to water down the Torah to reach their low level. But that's a terrible educational system, because you're guaranteeing that that student should always remain on the bottom. Instead of, and also it's a disrespect to the Torah by compromising the Torah. Instead, you bring them up to the Torah. Of course, you know that not everyone could do everything overnight. You can't change everyone overnight. But recognize that the Torah is out there. You can't water down the Torah. You can't compromise it. You can't adulterate it. But you can look at the Torah as the goal, and you bring the person closer and closer to the Torah. So in fact, all the three teachings of the first Mishnah are reflected in the parsha that we just referred to. Aaron is lighting the menorah. What does that mean, that he lit the menorah? The menorah in Hasidic teachings tell us represent the 7 branches of the Jewish people. Why 7? Because there are 7 personality types. Some people are governed by chesed, by kindness, some by gvura, by judgment, and so on. We have 7 traits, which we discussed in other classes. We won't go into it right now, but if you look at the totality of the Jewish people, they're divided into 7 personality types. Yes, we have 12 tribes. That's a different division, but there's a division of 7. There's also a division of 5. There's many different divisions. There's a division of 3, Cohen, Levi, Yisrael. But we're talking about personality types, the emotional makeup of people. We have 7 different prototypes. And Aaron's lighting of the menorah is to kindle the souls of every Jew. This is the first message. The first message is that you have to be deliberate in judgment. You have to recognize that every Jew has that spark of holiness in him or her. Every Jew has a soul. And our responsibility is to light up that soul, but not just to light up the soul by some perfunctory way. We light up every soul, all the different levels. And how do we do that? How can we accommodate all the different levels? The answer is we make sure that when we light a soul, when we ignite a soul, that the flame goes up on its own. We enable the person to be able to shine without us having to always rekindle the person for the same thing. The person is able to grow and be on their own because they have an established pattern of growth that we enable them. Instead of just spoon feeding them every every inch of the way, we give them the ability to stand on their own. But then the question is, should we alter the Torah to accommodate everyone, to make it easier for everyone, bring the Torah down to them? The Torah then adds that Aaron did something very special. He didn't change anything, the Torah says. And the question is asked by all the commentators, do you have to praise Aaron that Aaron followed God's instructions? Which simple person, knowing that this is what God commands him to do, would deviate from God's instructions, especially someone of the caliber of Aaron, the holiest of Jews, second to Moses only, a man who was passionate in his love for God? He has to be told that he has to follow instructions and not deviate, especially when we're not dealing with climbing Mount Everest. We're dealing with lighting a menorah, cleaning out the cups of oil, refilling the oil, putting in a wick. That's not exactly the most difficult thing. And why would he want to change? And there are dozens of answers to that question, but here we have a new answer to that question. Aaron might have thought that when I'm kindling the souls of the Jewish people, not everyone is on the same level. They can't all face the center. They can't all reach the core of Judaism, of godliness. Let some of them remain distant. Let them remain facing a different direction. And maybe later on with time they'll come a little bit closer. And therefore he might have said, I'm going to change. I'm not going to treat everyone with the same standards. He says, no, he didn't change. Every Jew was going to be illuminated with the same light that represents the same standard. And if anything, I'm going to raise the standards for the people on the lowest level to help uplift them so they could be on their own. So we have all these different teachings, be deliberate in judgment, raise many students, and create a fence around the law. This question that I just referred to, why does the Torah have to tell us that Aaron did as he was told? And Rashi adds, this is to teach you his praise, that he didn't alter anything, he didn't deviate. There are many answers to that question. One answer the Rebbe gives is that the menorah was a miraculous entity. When Moses was told to make a golden menorah out of one piece of gold with all the intricate designs on it, the apples, the cups, the flowers, buttons, all these things were impossible for him to make. So God said, throw the gold into the fire, and out came the menorah. So the whole menorah was miraculous, and the fire of the menorah was also miraculous. The Talmud tells us that the Ner HaMaravi, the western flame, never extinguished. They had to extinguish it in order to rekindle it, but if they hadn't extinguished it, it would never go out. That was the Hanukkah miracle that happened throughout the first temple and at the beginning of the second temple era. So the whole thing about the menorah was miraculous. When you're dealing with miraculous things, does it make a difference about the details? How you're going to light the menorah, to do it exactly as you were told? It defies human involvement. Humans couldn't fulfill the mitzvah of lighting the menorah on their own. God is doing it for us. Why do we care about the little practical details? We can do it any way we want. God was just maybe suggesting doing it this way, but who says we have to follow every suggestion? We'll do how we feel most comfortable doing. And I don't mean just comfortable physically. I mean comfortable spiritually. So the Torah tells us, no, Aaron, in spite of recognizing this was divine, the menorah, everything about it was supernatural. The part of the lighting that God gave us, each detail was crucial. That means that no matter how divine and spiritual someone could be, they have to recognize that where does your real connection to God lie? In the small details of action. There are many people who would tell you, I'm spiritual, but I'm not observant, or I'm not religious. What they mean by that is, and we take them at their word, that they feel spiritual feelings. That's nice and that's beautiful. That's wonderful. But if you don't translate that into the observance of the small little details, you cannot create a bridge between yourself and God. It's an imaginary relationship. It's like daydreaming about a love affair with someone. It's not real. It's in your imagination. We cannot connect to God just by feeling God's presence in us by meditating alone. And this this is not intended to disparage meditation. That's a very important part of Judaism. But in order to make the bridge between us and God, that connection requires the mitzvah, fulfilling God's will, even to the small details that seem insignificant. They're not insignificant. Just like no one of us is insignificant, no one mitzvah is insignificant. And the fact that people ask the question, why does such a big God, such an infinite God, care about a little tiny, infinitesimally small action on our part? The answer is, for God's infinity, nothing is too small, just like nothing is too big. Something that's truly infinite, you can't say, well, God really cares about the universe, which is vast, but he doesn't care about planet Earth. Or he cares about planet Earth, but he doesn't care about one individual. Or I care about that individual, but he doesn't care about one gesture of a mitzvah. No, the tiniest little thing has the same value, in fact, greater value than the whole universe. The whole universe is zero in relation to God. But if God says, I want you to do this little mitzvah, that little mitzvah is more vast, it's more powerful, more potent than all of existence, because that is connected to God, who is truly infinite. And that's what the message is, that when you're dealing with God and you feel spirituality, you feel this connection, you don't change anything. You do exactly as you're told. And that's what gives you the ability to illuminate your own soul, to illuminate the souls of others. One very important thing about the menorah that we'll conclude with. The Rebbe pointed this out, two things about the menorah. Number one, the branches of the menorah were not round, semicircle, as it is often depicted. And it's so depicted on the Arch of Titus, the one who destroyed the Second Temple, and ostensibly took the menorah and described the menorah, depicted it on the arch. That is not a reliable depiction, because number one, it has a serpent on it. There was no serpent on the menorah in the temple. It doesn't have legs. The menorah in the temple had legs. And as Rashi, and both Rashi and Rambam, from two different corners of the world at that time, Rashi was the Ashkenazic, Rambam was the Sephardic, they both say that the branches of the menorah were straight, diagonally. They went up, they were not curved. And it's very important that we look at biblical subjects through Jewish eyes, not through the eyes of the tyrant, the despot, the mass murderer of the Roman Empire, who sent us into this exile in which we are still part of until very soon, imminently, we'll see the coming of Moshiach. The second thing is that the Torah describes that the menorah had cups on them, made out of the same piece of gold. The Rambam has a picture of the cups, and they're upside down. And to say that the Rambam was not an artist, and therefore he didn't draw it correctly, it doesn't make any sense. The Rambam was very meticulous in every little detail. There was no person more detailed than the Rambam, where he records every small teaching of Judaism, of Jewish law, in his massive work of the Mishna Torah. So the Rebbe explains that a cup has two functions. It's a container, it contains the liquid in it, and it's used to pour out. When we talk about the menorah and the temple, the Rambam wants to emphasize that the function of the menorah's cups was to pour out the spiritual light and energy outside of the Beis HaMikdash. Just like our sages teach us, based on the biblical description of the menorah in the temple, that the temple's menorah was not there to illuminate the temple. God didn't need the light, but through the windows, which were narrow in the inside and wider on the outside, which is the opposite of the way you want it. If you want to bring light from the outside into the temple, the purpose of the menorah was to bring light outside, to direct the light outside. And the same idea is present in the cups, that the main idea of the cups of the menorah is to indicate that the light of the menorah is not to remain the light contained in a holy place, but it should be transmitted outward to reach the whole world. And may Hashem help us that through the lighting of the menorah vicariously, through the study of this parsha, we will soon reach the fulfillment of the lighting of the menorah literally through the Kohen Gadol, through Aaron, who will return together with Moses, and we'll see him lighting the menorah in the Beis HaMikdash with the imminent coming of Moshiach and the complete and total redemption.